former candidate for the U.S. Senate, longtime radio talk show host, author, and conservative policy advocate.
Justices to the Supreme Court, the left has been in open panic.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Isolation Nation. How are we dealing with it? When will it end? How bad will the fallout be? Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. America goes crazy on the coronavirus. The nation and the world close their doors and stay home. And nobody has any idea what comes next. But we will bring you sharp analysis and information from multiple angles, from multiple experts from LibertyNation.com. We'll focus on the economic angle, the potentially frightening collapse of the stock market and job market, with Economics Correspondent Andrew Moran. Threats to our liberty with the expanded power of the federal government in this time of crisis, with constitutional lawyer and legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. The big question of whether President Donald Trump is equal to the entirely new and unprecedented challenges presented him in these last days, whether Trump is equal to such a time as this. But we start with a social angle on all this, how we as individuals and as a nation are dealing with an unprecedented forced experiment in radical social distancing. As we're joined by the better half of Liberty Nation, the editor-in-chief of LibertyNation.com herself, Leesa K. Donner. Leesa, welcome back.
Thank you, Tim. Glad to be here. Well, I don't know where else I would be.
We don't really have any choice. Fortunately, we've had a good marriage for 34 years, and our kids still like us, so we're in pretty good shape, the two of us. But I want to talk about the behavioral side of this. We lived through, you and I, through 9/11, and me especially through the JFK assassination. And one of the things that happened in both was a total loss of humor, of wit. Everyone was sullen, depressed, it seemed. In this case, what we've seen is sort of a mix of dark humor and real humor and doom and gloom. It's like people are not sure whether they're allowed to still laugh. They think so, but they're not sure.
I wrote an article this week that was pretty popular called the Many Social Benefits of the Coronavirus. And, no more rush hour, no more crowds, no more standing in line. Sometimes you just need to look at the bright side.
Well, as you've said, what the whole country is going through is like a forced social experiment. You have examined this question closely, and it's obviously still a work in progress. But what stands out to you right now, circa mid to late March 2020?
Well, we can whine and complain all we want, as I wrote for Liberty Nation, but, here we are. We need to make sense of it and try to capitalize on the type of person we are. If we're an introvert, maybe these are the best days of our lives. We don't have to go to Aunt Ethel's 90th birthday party because they'll bar us at the door. Maybe we have a long reading list on our Kindle. Maybe we can binge watch something like Schitt's Creek, which is absolutely hysterical, with Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara. Maybe we need to find some hobbies. Maybe we're type A and we need to clean out the sock drawer. I actually had my kids this week do something they've never done, which is organize the refrigerator and the pantry, and they did a darn good job.
Yeah, better than I did, but let's not talk about that part. To be both crude somewhat and truthful at the same time, Lise, Liberty Nation and online organizations like it, the most invulnerable to the virus, will get a louder voice now that people are forced to fill day after day on their calendars and they can't go out. They need to be with themselves or their immediate families more than they've ever been used to. It seems like people like us, online journalists, have a greater responsibility than ever to deliver accurate and timely information and reliable analysis.
Well, I think this is good for the nation. And as I wrote in my article about the social benefits of coronavirus, a lot of people have kids at home. They're home from high school, grammar school, elementary school, middle school. And, we have a site called lngenz.com. And, there's a lot to benefit from. There's quizzes, worksheets, curriculum on American history, government, civics. maybe this is a time when your kids might be open to a better balanced education instead of, having their malleable minds be drilled with lefty ideas.
Well, LN Gen Z was set up specifically to explore and fulfill the mission of the parent organization of LibertyNation.com, at least one generation away, which is applying America's founding principles to the issues of today. That says it all. And we have ready curricula available for the many people who are suddenly thrust into being forced to homeschool their children, something that you and I have done over the years, but most people haven't. And so, LN Gen Z, let's be shameless in promoting something which is readily available right now to parents who are desperately looking for ways to continue their kids' education, because many, if not most, schools across the country have been shut down, many for the rest of the year.
Well, now here's a scary thought. A lot of parents might be dialing into what their kids' homework is, and they could really see, what their kids are being taught. And, that might be downright frightening. That might lead a lot of parents to think, gee, I didn't realize they were teaching this or that. I think we have a great opportunity for, in many ways, connecting. People say, well, distance yourself, et cetera. But I think this, at least for families, gives us an opportunity to reconnect in new and different ways.
Now, you've been a prolific writer over this time of crisis and uncertainty and fear and all that. And another of the illuminating articles you've written during this time is on the reliability of the information we're getting, which is obviously a moving target, and about the one best test sample we should be looking at for answers on how bad or not bad the coronavirus really is. Tell us about that.
Well, a Stanford University professor put out an article on Stat magazine, and I've actually linked to that in my article. What he said is, we only have like one closed system to look at, and that's the Diamond Princess. And I think,
that would be the cruise ship.
Yes, exactly. I think what's happening is that all these experts are getting on TV every day and scaring the nation, I think, with unreliable information, and we just don't have enough yet.
Well, I think the most revealing remark that I heard all week, Leesa, was when I went to the supermarket on Monday morning, which was a good decision because after that, people that went to the same supermarket said the shelves were almost cleaned out. They were about 20% empty when I went there. But the produce manager there said the problem is everybody wants a 6-month supply of everything. So people are panicking as if it is a natural disaster, as if there be a hurricane or even a tsunami, when in fact, I don't think that bathroom tissue is something that's really been at issue when there's a virus going around.
We don't have the capacity, I think, to really keep up with 6 months worth of anything unless you're going to be a prepper and dial into everything canned and frozen. And even frozen, you have to have enough freezer space. Look, you can whip yourself up into an entire frenzy, or you can, really try to make the best of the situation and not get involved in all the doom and gloom. And, I'm just a little worried about how the politicians are barking at each other when they should be really working together at a time like this. I think the American public would be much happier if they weren't barking at each other.
Just to punctuate the point about that cruise ship and the closed environment that it uniquely represents at this time as a subject of examining how it spreads. There's 700 on that ship, mostly older, certainly higher than the average age of Americans. There were 700 on the ship, and seven have died. So that would leave it at 1%. That would be maybe the most accurate depiction of what we might expect when the virus hits at its worst point here in the U.S. Leesa, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tim. Stay safe.
And you all stay safe, and also stay right there, because when we come back, we're going to be joined by LibertyNation.com economics correspondent Andrew Moran on just how bad the economy is being hit by the coronavirus.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, the emotional challenge for each of us in this not-so-brave new world which envelops us these days is to avoid getting depressed or fearful in your isolation or because of your job, which is now in jeopardy or not even there anymore, but also to avoid being uplifted with false hope or pie-in-the-sky best-case scenarios. Things might turn out for the best, but we can hardly count on it, at least not yet. Now, of the many 180-degree changes we're all trying to process as we view the world circa late March 2020, arguably the most frightening is to an economy and stock market, world markets, hit by a thunderbolt which jolted them from robust growth to recession in a matter of days. Joining us to help make sense of what's already felt like a long, strange trip with miles to go before we sleep, to seamlessly segue from the Grateful Dead to Robert Frost, is LibertyNation.com economics correspondent Andrew Moran. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, sir. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Which would you choose, Grateful Dead or Robert Frost?
I'm going to say whoever has the most supply of razor blades.
I'll let our individual listeners parse that statement for themselves. So, Andrew, let's start with a dramatic understatement. Things are very different than the last time you joined us when we were discussing the almost esoteric question of whether 2% or 3% economic growth was realistic for 2020. Now, we're told that we're looking at the live possibility of a complete global economic collapse. So let's start with something that some might consider crude, but I think just might hit to the heart of the matter. Looking at the hysterical sell-off on Wall Street, it strikes me as very similar to the run on bathroom tissue at stores all across the country in terms of the behavioral instincts of a people in panic. Is that an apt analogy for the market?
Yeah, yes, I think it is an apt analogy. And, we tend to make fun of people who are stockpiling toilet paper or in the financial markets, people selling everything they have. But you can't necessarily blame them because there's so much chaos out there. There's so much uncertainty. No one knows what the heck is going on. Anything can happen. Although I haven't seen the data to support this, but I think the main sell-off that you mentioned earlier had to do with the mom and pop investors. These were people who they put all their money into the late stage of the bull market, and they couldn't bear the bear market.
Sure, I mean I was among those that panic sold in 2008, and I don't really regret it. Although hindsight is always 20/20. Nevertheless, Andrew, won't the fact that we're in a truly global economy make our U.S. recovery from this so much harder because we can't control what happens with our dozens of trading partners whose economies will likely all go into recession of one kind or another? And how well positioned would the U.S. be compared to EU nations and the rest of the world if there is indeed a steep global recession?
Well, I think the European Union, they already used a lot of their stimulus programs. Just this week, they announced more bond buying on top of the quantitative easing they were doing before. So they already had all these Keynesian QE interventions, even during the boom phase. When it comes to the Federal Reserve, the main problem is that, yes, they will probably rescue the economy right now, and because they fired off all their bazookas, $1.5 trillion in repos, and then the 0% interest rates. They've thrown everything but the kitchen sink at this crisis. But the main problem with right now is that during when there is the next economic collapse and there's the next recession, the Fed will be out of bullets. They use absolutely everything. Perhaps the only thing they could use now would be sub-zero interest rates. And some Fed members have said we are not considering negative interest rates, even though if nothing happens in the market, if nothing survives and the coronavirus lingers, that may be the only thing they have left.
Now, the federal government does have more bullets to fire. They can spend a whole lot of money, and they're already planning to spend more than $1 trillion of it to prop up the economy. So, Andrew, too much, too little, just right?
Well, I know maybe a lot of people give me slack for this, but when you consider the current finances of the United States, $1.2 trillion is a lot of money when you consider a government that's already running a $1 trillion deficit, a $23 trillion national debt, $500 billion in annual debt servicing payments. So perhaps this would have not been such a big price tag if Trump had actually been fiscally conservative during the days of wine and roses instead of just adding to the debt and then hopefully get bailed out by the private sector, which right now is what actually is happening. Trump will probably continue to get bailed out because there's such a huge appetite for treasuries right now. You saw this just last week when the benchmark 10-year note fell to a record low of 0.318%. That's the lowest it's ever been. And then you have the Fed, who's also bailing out the White House by monetizing the debt. And then the other problem you have is if Trump fails to win in November and Joe Biden wins, then you have America's finances will be probably a lot worse because of all of his multi-trillion-dollar promises that he only paid for with Fed easing, with more borrowing, and with hopefully more private sector bailouts on the bond market.
Now, we don't want to be all doom and gloom here, so let's talk about our eventual recovery from this nightmare, which feels like it's going on is still at about 3 a.m., still far from the waking hour, should we say. A lot of economists are discussing a so-called V-shaped recovery, fast down, fast back up. Is that a valid forecast based on what we know right now, understanding there's so much still to come?
Well, the main problem with the market right now is that even everything that's been thrown at it, with the Fed easing and the government bailouts and all the other governments around the world and central banks doing the same thing, is that nothing seems to be improving. The main thing is that the coronavirus, as long as it stays, as long as it keeps infecting people, you're going to continue having these dead cat bounces. You're going to have investors trying to catch falling knives. You're going to have these volatile 1,000-point swings. When President Trump said a week ago that when this whole thing subsides and the market's going to boom, he was right. There's so many opportunities right now, and everything's going to return to normal. And you have Fed easing and pumping money into it, and then it's a year afterwards you have to worry about when the bust happens. But overall, everything's going to return to normal. People shouldn't be panicking as much. You're going to get your toilet paper. You're going to get your avocados. We're all going to be good to go.
That's what we were waiting to hear. Thank you for joining us, Andrew. I appreciate it. Andrew Moran, economics correspondent for LibertyNation.com. We'll take a quick break and then come back to address the question of whether President Trump is equal to such a time as this.
Where can you find honest political commentary? With sobering analysis.
Even the most trusting among us may find a company's latest plans deeply intrusive.
Accountability.
Perhaps it's time to start asking the right questions.
Deconstructing threats to our liberty.
Unparalleled insight into important stuff.
And boldly reporting the truth.
Truth is making a comeback.
Well, hello again, and welcome to Election 2020 Roundtable.
Uprising podcast of LibertyNation.com.
Abortion is functionally sexist.
From my cold, dead hand.
Subscribe to LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
Click on youtube.com/LibertyNation.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
It came in the twinkling of an eye for our 43rd president, George W. Bush. He'd arrived in the White House just 8 months before with the agenda which was supposed to define his presidency starting to gain steam. Domestic initiatives, tax cuts, economic growth, cultural renewal, and no nation building. It was a beautiful autumn Tuesday, and Bush was innocently reading a book to second graders in Sarasota, Florida. And then, the moment which will, like Pearl Harbor, live in infamy, the terrorist attacks of 9/11, We all remember that look in the eyes and soul of George W. Bush upon word of the second plane hitting the World Trade Center, his sudden realization that his presidency would now instantly transform to a wartime footing. Now, our 45th president likely didn't experience that type of single moment when he realized the entire focus of his administration would have to change. But it probably didn't take Donald Trump long to realize he'd now be challenged by this coronavirus in a way that made everything from Russia collusion to impeachment look like child's play. Let's not sugarcoat the landscape suddenly appearing before us. Donald Trump will be challenged down to his core in ways every president knows are possible, but precious few are forced to experience. FDR on December 7, 1941. Bush 43 on 9/11. LBJ on the day that JFK was assassinated. They were the modern-day presidents who fell victim to the sudden occurrence of national nightmares. Each of them passed the test set before them, not via a straight line, though, but rather through long and winding roads of calming the nation, demonstrating command, and making one hard call after another on a day-to-day basis. We shouldn't understate the emotional toll this must be exacting on this president. He's forced to stand by and watch an economy he's worked so hard to strengthen, the very centerpiece of his presidency, now tanking right before his eyes, with little he can do to stop it beyond the usual stimulative measures prescribed by government at a time of financial crisis, like near-zero interest rates and cash on the barrelhead for every American. Yes, the market could come roaring back once this crisis has passed, but we could also descend into a deep recession, along with the rest of the world we cannot control, with the election just around the corner. The fact is that nobody knows. Predicting human behavior during and after a panic is among the most perilous of all pursuits. On the other hand, could Trump actually ultimately benefit from the opportunity set before him to function in disaster and demonstrate a resolve in the face of a true national crisis? Can he prove to the American people that he does indeed possess skills he had previously not been required to demonstrate? Sure, but we're a long way from knowing the answer. Beyond that, the president is dealing with a crisis unique to our modern history in one profound way. It affects literally every single American. No person in this country, we're told, is immune from either carrying the virus, catching it, or suffering the fallout from its spread. The people of the South and the Heartland and the West were certainly emotionally rocked by Pearl Harbor, the JFK assassination, and 9/11, but those tragedies did not reach into their very homes as COVID-19 has done. And now, we have not just ourselves, but everyone else and the nation as a whole with whom to concern ourselves. And that's before we even stop to add up the inevitable carnage of shuttered businesses, lost jobs and wages, and the astronomical cost of recovery. Trump has proven repeatedly over his legendary life and times that he is nothing if not nimble, a quality now required of him every single day as he calls upon Americans to sacrifice, something no president ever wishes to do. But he's also being called upon to reach deep within himself and extract other skills not comfortably in his wheelhouse. Can he convince the American people that he's doing everything within his power and that he's in control of the situation? Can he keep the nation calm? Can he bring down the temperature of an elite media covering this crisis as if it was just another in a long line of Trump scandals? Crucially, can he win the confidence of so many Americans who find him repulsive? Can he demonstrate leadership to the point of building genuine national unity on a subject which every reasonable person agrees must be immune from political partisanship? Trump will also be required to swallow the bitter medicine of potentially reckless federal spending, as we talked about with Andrew Moran in the last segment. the equivalent of dropping cash out of airplanes, which will blast apart any semblance of fiscal or economic discipline and leave Trump and the Congress with a mighty mess to clean up when the dust clears. Trump's posture should properly be to eliminate partisanship from his own repertoire, as he's largely done these past 2 weeks, and publicly exhort leftists and their allies in the media to hit the pause button on their personal attacks so that a nation threatening to reach the breaking point can at least unite in the battle against this plague on all our houses. The anti-Trump media, the fourth estate, must get over itself for just a breath, and project to the nation the reality that we have only one president, like him or not. They need to refresh their understanding of why freedom of the press was granted in the Bill of Rights. It was for the crucial function of informing, not influencing the public. And rarely has that been more imperative than right now. Right now. As each day brings new problems and more infections and deaths and restrictions, we will surely find out much about this man we elected to shake up the status quo and who now most ironically finds himself desperately seeking to preserve it. Perhaps Barack Obama can sympathize, having run on a platform of fundamentally transforming America, but who was forced to employ drastic measures immediately upon taking office following the Great Recession of 2008, just to keep himself and the nation from sinking into the abyss. Indeed, Trump might be wise to seek advice and counsel and solace from the only four men who can truly understand what he's going through right now, having lived through the same pressure cooker of the hardest job in the world, and that would be the four living presidents, all of whom faced more crises than any of us could possibly know. Three of them, Obama, Bill Clinton, Jimmy Carter, are from the opposite party. But should that even matter right now? If George W. Bush and his bitter opponent, then Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, could memorably share a heartfelt hug on the floor of Congress in the aftermath of 9/11, surely Trump, Pelosi, Schumer, and everyone else can be expected to offer nothing short of full mutual support. Whether an ordinary citizen or one in the realm of politics or the media, can we not reduce our thinking, just for now, to what each of us can do to help? For better or worse, we have only the man in the White House upon whom to rely for the leadership required at this never-to-be-forgotten juncture in American history. And we all have more time on our hands for deeper thought these days. So why not take a minute to contemplate in a hopeful and prayerful state the same question about President Trump, which was asked in the biblical account of Queen Esther, heroine of the faith, after she accepted the charge to protect the most vulnerable at a time of great peril. Who knows whether he has not come to the nation for such a time as this? And we'll return with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, so far today, we've focused on the social and economic side of this coronavirus disaster and the challenge of a lifetime for President Trump. And now we examine the state of our liberty as the federal government gets deeper and deeper into more and more methods of stimulating an economy they fully expect to all but collapse in the days ahead. So it's time to bring on our guardian of individual liberty for the segment which we call Talkin' Liberty. Welcome, Scott Cosenza.
Hi, Tim. Thank you.
Okay, so you are Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor and someone who keeps an eye on what the ramifications are of government action, and that's never been more important than right now. So let's go through some of the things that are at issue as the country tries to adjust to a period of time like nothing we've ever seen. Martial law. Let's clear the air about what martial law is and isn't, and whether there's any actual danger of the United States falling under martial law.
Well, I'll put the lead out front, and by and large, no, there is no such danger. We keep hearing these things like shelter in place and self-quarantine. There was a story this week out of New York with dueling predictions or directives, one from the governor and one from the mayor, where the mayor says be ready to, I don't know if you use the term shelter in place or self-quarantine, but it gave people the impression that there would somehow be a lockdown, and then Governor Cuomo came out and rejected that notion vociferously. So there is no mechanism in the U.S. Constitution for the imposition of some kind of martial law upon declaration of emergency by the president. That's not a function of the law. The president did declare a state of emergency, and that gives the executive branch certain latitudes and rights under federal law, meaning the body of the federal laws, but not, Tim, under the Constitution. There's no constitutional trigger that has been thrown, and therefore our rights that are granted to us, or more better said, protected under the Constitution, right? They're granted by nature or our creator, as the founders specified in the founding documents, but those can't be abridged simply because the president has declared an emergency.
So, Scott, I want to talk a little bit about federalism and the 10th Amendment and the division of powers and responsibilities of the federal government versus states. Those powers not specifically delegated to the federal government are to be given, according to the Constitution, to the states and the people. Is the proper way to look at the response to this coronavirus disaster that there's really 50 different responses, that the individual states and the decisions of governors are generally the most important for individual people during this time? What I'm saying is that the people of Ohio, for example, are now living under very different rules than the people of California, which are very different from the people of New York or Virginia or Florida.
I think no, that the president here is actually more important, and the reason why, it's not a fun story for most of the legacy media to report on, but most of the problems with this virus and its spread have been governmental. And I don't mean the actions of one individual, Donald J. Trump. I mean all the regulations that frustrate a quick response. The president was on TV talking, Tim, about how the N95 masks that were constructed for construction and industrial use, due to a new law that's been passed, can now be sold to hospitals. But before, because they weren't so certified, they couldn't be sold that way. Well, so this is, something that government stood in the way. There are things at the state level that can be done. I read a story, Tim, that Pennsylvania was closing their truck stops. Well, the problem with that is, guess who needs the truck stops? The guys driving the masks from Michigan to Florida, right? I mean, he needs to get fuel, he needs to go to the bathroom, maybe get some food. So these are government regulations that need to be knocked down, and they're across the board, but perhaps more federally than at the state level, these sorts of regulations. But there's room across the board, and I think, honestly, Tim, really, we see a dual track here in terms of our dealings with liberty and the response to COVID-19. On the one track, we have these tyrannical impulses, like the stories you read about where the mayor's been given the power to stop gun sales and liquor and seize this and that, right? That's the and on the other track, it seems like we're in a world of Atlas Shrugged in the final days, where they're knocking down all these preposterous regulations that were erected to appease one person or one interest group.
Right now, people are sort of looking to Donald Trump and the Congress and the government and the agencies and the FDA and the CDC and the NIH to save them. All they can do is, as they ordinarily should, set the parameters so that the private sector can do the job that only they can do particularly well. Now, among the other elements of fallout in this whole crisis is delay of arrests for certain nonviolent crimes due to, I guess, Scott, the need for lack of contact between everybody.
Tim, when the New York City Police Department did that blue flu thing, I think it was in regards to the Eric Garner incident. They were going to refuse to arrest people, except for if they really needed to be arrested. And those of us who are interested in liberty thought, well, hey, maybe you could just implement that kind of strategy all year long, because a custodial arrest is perhaps common for the police, but for those of us who aren't police, it's a radical thing to be arrested, and the impact that it has on the lives of people. And it should only be done really when required. And I just thought that was interesting. The story that I told you about is out of Philadelphia, but I think this is true for a number of police departments. But when we just look at the actual announcement, where people who would normally be arrested and processed at a detective division, they're going to be temporarily detained to confirm their identification and complete necessary paperwork, and then arrested on a warrant at a later date. And then it says decisions will be made on a case-by-case basis based on the severity of the offense, their criminal record, and potential danger to the community. And I just think that screams to me, Tim, why weren't previous arrests made on a case-by-case basis based on the severity of the offense, the perpetrator's criminal record, and the potential danger to the community, right? Wouldn't that be a more sane way to go about deciding who to take off the street and not?
Desperate times require desperate measures, Scott.
Yeah, indeed.
Now, when the dust settles and the smoke clears from this period of time like no other we've ever been through, and the federal government has thrown well over $1 trillion. By the time everything adds up, it'll be well over $1 trillion at this problem. We're going to have to pay the piper one of these days, and one of the things being discussed, it's inevitable, Scott, a tax increase of up to $1 trillion.
Well, I like to talk about it that way because I think no media is talking about it that way. And this is the stimulus spending package. Instead of being billed as a paycheck for you, me, and every other American, we should bill it what it is. It's a giant tax increase that goes to some people. And the bill will have to be paid, Tim, at some point.
Finally, on the matter again of constitutional issues raised by emergency measures taken by the government, student privacy laws. Apparently, they still apply if coronavirus just closed your school, as so many of them have been closed across the country.
We're going to see, Tim, lots of litigation after this, and the president's emergency order doesn't cover, these sorts of deviations from a law like that. This is one of the reasons why it takes so long for a company to maybe produce a face mask or a glove. Like, the legal environment and regulatory environment really do matter.
Well, I think the only solution to avoiding a circus of litigation once all this is done, Scott, would be the Shakespeare solution.
Tim, how dare you?
I didn't say what that was. He might have had multiple solutions, Scott, and I'm recommending one of them. I'm not going to say which, but I think you'll be here next week.
I appreciate that.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, I think.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue, hosted by our own Mark Angelides. All of them available on demand at LibertyNation.com. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty, and for heaven's sake, stay healthy. See you next time.